Okay, so I have, as always, for any of you who've been to any of my talks before, lots and lots of information, far too much information to share in this short period of time. So, and I'm passionate for this information. So even when I was going over it this afternoon, kind of giving my husband a little tour of it, I could feel myself just like a newborn puppy tumbling over all my ideas. And so if I happen to not finish sentences and you have no idea what I'm talking about, please ask a question, interrupt me. It's perfectly okay. I will say that this is going to be a very personal presentation. My goal was to share lots of ideas about how you can incorporate play, and I've done that by sharing my own personal stories. So there are two things I want to say about that. First off, I do not have a perfect family. I do not have this all figured out. We have lots of days of tears and temper tantrums. We have lots of days where there's no play, when I would like to just sell them all to some passing, roving band of dystopian theater troupe. So I want you to keep that in mind, that what you're seeing today is the highlights, not the lowlights. And the second is that this is not supposed to be prescriptive at all. It's not supposed to tell you what to do in your homes, but it's kind of supposed to either fill a toolbox and then you can rifle through the toolbox and find a tool that might fit, or it's supposed to spark some playful, creative ideas in yourself about how you can make this work for you and your family. Because the thing about play is it's very unique to every individual and every family. So those are my two goals. Keep in mind that, like I said, this is the highlights you're seeing, and it's not supposed to be a prescription. It's supposed to be something to inspire you. Just gonna make sure everyone's in. Okay, so let us start. Originally, this was titled The Power of Play for Learning, and as I went along, I realized that, well, there is a little bit about learning in here. It's more about the power of play for a lot of different things. So I've retitled it The Power of Play for Learning, among other things. This is based on the work of Dr. Gordon Neufeld. He's a psychologist out of Vancouver. And this PowerPoint will be made available to you, so don't worry about taking notes for that. Dr. Neufeld wrote a book called Hold On to Your Kids, Why Parents Need to Matter More Than Their Peers. It's a really good, solid book. It was written with Dr. Gabor-Mate, but it is very technical. And the practical part of it is just in maybe the last quarter. If you're interested in the scientific theory of the development of his ideas, then all power to you, read it. But if you're really just interested in figuring out how it works, then I highly recommend Dr. Deborah McNamara's Rest, Play, Grow, Making Sense of Preschoolers. So she's kind of a second in command at the Institute, and she's very practical and shares lots of stories. I've met her several times. She's just a really lovely woman, and I really love the Rest, Play, Grow book. And so as it shows, a third of the book is dedicated to these ideas of play. And then the newest book, for any of you who might be educators in our audience, is called Reclaiming Our Students: Why Children Are More Anxious, Aggressive, and Shut Down Than Ever, and What We Can Do About It. And this is actually aimed at educators, and it's written by Tamara Neufeld-Stryjak, who is Dr. Neufeld's daughter, and Hannah Beach. And it is actually written for educators, and they have a lot of supports that they're getting in place to help educators bring this material into the classroom. So if you're interested in that, that's a really good one. It's new. I've only read bits and pieces of it so far. For those of you who don't know me, and I do feel like I've been in front for a long time now, since this whole pandemic started and we started getting lots of people. My name is Jennifer Gaiman. I have been homeschooling for 24 and a half years now. I have 5 children. 4 of my children have already graduated. 3 of them graduated directly from homeschool into post-secondary. And then my son, who's in the karate uniform, he actually did half of grade 11 and all of grade 12 at the high school and managed to wrangle full credits out of his guidance counselor there, and he graduated with a full Manitoba diploma. So he's my first child to officially graduate. And then I'm still learning with Rachel. She's 15 and we're doing grade 10 in the living room. And yeah, and even in this picture, choosing pictures to pick for them, there's a lot of play happening here. So my daughter did a creative communications degree, which almost killed her playfulness, but she loves to play around with communication and design, and that's slowly coming back. And then Maggie won she won the national skills award for photography. She loves photography. She's also a pianist and a musician. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. My family is very heavily, or was very heavily, involved in theater. So that's my son Josh in a crown and costume that he created for himself when he played Hamlet in our Shakespearean troupe, and he's now studying theater at University of Manitoba. He's a backstage tech guy. My son Tim, he's my scientist, but even in his science-loving brain, he plays around with ideas and does costume work. He's really into airsoft right now and playing around with that whole idea. And then my daughter, she has headless Barbies that she has retooled and recolored and done all sorts of wild things with lots of have a table of her art. Yes, Jackie, I would recommend Rest, Play, Grow for parents of older children too. It is mainly for preschoolers, although the tag does say for anybody who acts like preschoolers. But the theory in that book is about attachment and development, and that is not age-based at all. The way we attach, the way we develop, the way we mature, that happens across the lifespan. So honestly, that material has been foundational in helping to understand my own partnership with my husband. So it's great. So that's kind of who we are. And we do play a lot. I think anybody who knows us knows that we play a lot in my house. And I think that that has been both a result of our homeschooling and also one of the reasons that we chose to homeschool. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling little prophecy there. So I want to talk about two things today. I want to talk about how play takes care of us. And then I'm going to talk about how we take care of play. Now, initially, I was all excited about doing the science. I was going to share all the science behind it, but then I realized that there's so much science to share with you. And so much of the science seems to be very, like it's not controversial. Every single one of the provinces in Canada on their education sites has some sort of packet dedicated to the importance of play, especially in the younger years education. So nobody is arguing that play is really important. So what I chose to do instead of talking about the science, if you don't believe me, I'll leave it as an assignment for the student to go. Here is just a sampling of YouTube videos. Most of these are TED Talks. About the importance of play and why we should be playing and some of the benefits of play. Peter Gray is very much looking for alternative ways to do education that brings play in it. Stuart Brown is a play scientist. One I don't have up here, but Jake Pansep is, he studies play in rats and how those behaviors can be seen in humans. So there's lots and lots of places you can go to watch. A lot of these videos are 10, 15, 20, 25 minutes long. So if you have a little bit of time, you can check them out. I also have a whole list of books which have inspired some of my journey. Some of them are more scientific than others. Some look more at educational venues for learning. None of them are specific to homeschool, but just the importance of play and how it builds better kids, it builds better adults. So you can a number of these I believe are available from the Winnipeg Public Library. I'm pretty sure The Power of Play by David Elkind is available there, and Stuart Brown's might be too. So you can go and check those out. And that's where I'm going to leave the science because some of it's going to come in as we talk about. So what I want to talk about now is what play gives to us, the benefits that play gives to us. And Dr. Neufeld actually has 12 benefits that he discusses. He has a whole course. He has actually 3 courses on play, and most of this material has been drawn from his first 6-hour course. So it's kind of a whirlwind turn. But I've only chosen a handful of those to discuss, and I've combined some of them. So the first thing that play provides is rest, which may not seem like a likely thing because play is often active and we want to be active. But I'm not talking about rest as in the sit on the couch and relax, although that can be a part of it. I'm actually talking about a mode in the brain. It's called the parasympathetic mode. And we have two modes. Well, we have three modes in the brain, but the two we're concerned about today are the sympathetic mode and the parasympathetic. And the sympathetic is the work mode, it's the action mode, it's to get us going. And the parasympathetic mode is our rest and recharge. It's when we feel safe and secure, when we feel fulled up in our attachment, and just, that we can just sigh and rest and relax. And that's actually a chemical state in the brain. And when that state exists in our brain, that's when the brain gets to rework things and rewire things. It's kind of like how you restock the shelves at the grocery store after hours, because it's really hard to do it when everybody is in there and moving around and trying to grab stuff and moving stuff. And it's just so much easier to clean everything up and organize everything and make everything work better when there isn't all that action happening. So that's what the parasympathetic system does. And when we are under really intense stress, or we're under emotional strain, or we're very alarmed, then we actually can't enter into that mode. And one of the ways we enter into that mode is by eating. So for those of us who are stress eaters, that's what's happening, is we can engage the parasympathetic mode by eating. It's one of the reasons why children nurse for comfort. But anyways, one of the other ways that we enter that mode is play. And so it can be really, really important to make sure that we make time for play, because when our children play, then their brains go into this parasympathetic mode, which allows their brains to rewire, to do some new wiring, to clean out some old wiring, and that helps them to grow and mature. Time to integrate. Yes, integration happens in that, exactly. And so after each one of these, I'm just going to talk about a few tips and ideas. This is kind of a holistic thing. So if you have questions, some of it may come out because I'm going to speak to it in a later point. So the point about here is that if you do have a child who is struggling with anxiety, alarm, attention, aggression, just a child who's constantly fidgeting, who can't seem to relax, who can't seem to find any of that satiation, then it becomes vitally important for us as parents to figure out how we make time for play. We may need to figure out why they're not engaging in play, which is going to be some of what I talk about. And so that's my first tip for that, is play provides rest. And so if we have children that don't seem like they're resting much, then we need to make sure that we figure out how to give them that play. Play builds relationship and diffuses counter will. So play is actually the super glue of attachment. And we as adults, we understand this intuitively, because when we are interested in attaching with another adult, mostly in a sexual way, we flirt, because flirting is playful. And we know that attachment is built on playfulness. And so we as parents need to figure out how to flirt with our children. And this can be so hard, especially in such an alarming time that we're living in. If you're new homeschoolers, it can be overwhelming trying to figure out how to do that. Our kids can be scared and alarmed about not being at places that they normally used to be, whether that was school or extracurricular activities or their grandparents. So play is one of those ways that we can help the attachment together. And when we're attached, that's another way that you can enter into parasympathetic. So by spending time playing, we increase the attachment, we can lower our children's alarm, we can help them find rest, and then learning and brain growth can happen. So and now counter will is this weird thing, and it's a protection strategy actually, when children don't want to do what someone asks them to do unless they're in attachment with that person. So this saves a child. If a stranger comes up to a child and asks that child to do something or go with them, that child's going to say no. And it's a survival strategy. It's how children are protected. But this can get in the way when we're homeschooling, and there's a whole workshop on this. But it can get in the way because when we want our children to do math, or we need for our children to do their chores, or whatever it is we want for our children to do, if they're not feeling attached with us, then their counter will kick in. And play is a way that we can circumvent counter will, because when we're playing, children feel self-directed, adults feel self-directed in play, and so then the counter will defense will come down. I always say that if you have to choose between being a parent or being a teacher, choose the parent. Relationship is much more important. Putting aside the school for today or this week or this month or this season is actually not going to be damaging to your child, especially if you're working on the relationship and there's time for the play and the growth to happen. I guarantee that time spent in relationship and play will benefit everybody involved 100 times more than hitting your head against the wall trying to get them to do something that is just not happening for anybody. So the job here is to find a way that you can spend time playing with your child. This does not mean that if you do not like sitting down on the floor and dressing up Barbie dolls or playing with Lego, that you have to do that. I mean, that's great. That's great if your child has something that they really like doing and you can enter into that and spend time playing with that. But it's probably more important to find something that you really enjoy doing with them. So you can take a walk together. We do a lot of hiking, a lot of time in nature. There's a lot of science that says that even being in green space benefits our brain and body. So we try to spend a lot of time. And this is not an excuse to take your children out and try to teach them something. This is an opportunity to go out and just spend time with them. So let them lead, let them go where they want to go. My children, my 24-year-old just moved out a couple weeks ago, and so she emptied her childhood bedroom, and the rocks and the sticks and the pine cones, like just boxes and boxes of nature stuff that have been collected along the way of our journeys together. Do messy art together if you can. My daughter got into our 10-pound bag of flour, and one of my fondest memories is sitting on the floor drawing pictures in the flour with her. It was a mess. It really was. But I managed to just have the space and the patience in me to meet her in this beautiful place. Read books together. And this is just like the walking. Do not make this a time to, get information into them or to read it and then find out what they got out of it. Just find books that you're going to enjoy reading aloud together. We always read we listen to an audiobook when we travel together as a family or in a car. I read picture books. I mean, I'm lucky because there's 10 years between my oldest and my youngest. So we read picture books for a very long time in my house, but I strongly encourage you to check out the picture books. Find a list of some of the Read Brightly webpage, I think, has some great lists. There are some great picture books out there that have deep and meaningful stories in them. I was hoping I was going to read one today, but I may run out of time. Spend time dressing up with your kids. This was just a family event we were having, and I don't know what sparked it. I think the kids wanted everyone to dress up we have a tickle trunk, so just a trunk of costumes that we carry, hats, and yeah, we all dressed up, and then I think they made us we acted out a fairy tale or something, and just a really fun time. Tell jokes together, just enjoy being together. So if you can get down on the floor and play the Barbies, get down on the floor and play the Barbies, but just try to be joyful and happy with your kids. These eggs are at the Assiniboine Zoo. They used to be in the Kinsman Discovery Center. I'm not sure where they've moved them to now or if they have them, but every time we went to the zoo, we always took a funny picture of everybody in it. And so we have one of these pictures every year for 20 years, I guess, for as long as the eggs have been around. And that's just something that we share together, and it's a fun thing we look forward to when we're at the zoo. So third thing play does. Play processes emotion and aids recovery and healing. Dr. Neufeld calls play the outhouse for emotion. It's got a little picture of a little girl running to the outhouse, because play is where we can get rid of all of our emotions, and a lot of them are unpleasant kind of emotions in a place without consequences. Play is free from consequences, so we can feel the full extent of our emotions without any of our defenses kicking in. So sometimes it can be too much to feel an emotion, especially if you have sensitive kids. You'll find they might not want to cry. Or if you have older kids, they might not want to feel their anger because they know that there may be repercussions. So I grew up in a home where you weren't allowed to be angry. And so it's really hard for me to feel my anger because I would usually be punished because I was angry. And so then I need to find places where I can play so I can feel that anger. And I took up karate with my kids. I took up karate with my kids because I wanted my 10-year-old to go to karate, and I knew he wouldn't go if I didn't go, but I ended up realizing that I had a lot of aggression in my life that is just beautifully played out in karate. I fell in love with the sport. Yeah, so emotions have to move. Our children, a lot of you may have heard about self-regulation, and this is the ability to feel our emotions and to control ourselves in the height of the emotion. And children aren't capable of doing this at all until they're about 5 or 6, 7 or 8, older if they're sensitive. Most of us can't self-regulate when we are overwhelmed by really strong emotions. So our job as parents for the longest time is to offer co-regulation to help our children regulate their emotions. But play is a place where they get to go out and they get to feel those emotions in a safe way. And the exciting thing is that the neurons in the brain, neurons that fire together, wire together. And so when our children go out and they feel those emotions, and the brain doesn't know that they're play emotions, when they feel those emotions and they're able to figure out how those feel and what they can do about them, then their brain is wiring to help them better deal for when they're actually in a situation where that's happening. So your job as a parent is to encourage play that moves emotion. And this is one of those areas where I have lots and lots of pictures and stories to share. So this is the pie in the face game. This is my, I call him my son Outlaw. He's my daughter's boyfriend. And he purchased this game for Christmas, and you put whipped cream on it, and then you set a timer, and you have to put your face in, and the hand is going to come up and hit you. And so this is playing around with alarm. Yeah. Yeah. It's a, I'm hearing feedback. Can you all hear that?
Can you all hear that, or?
That's weird. So yeah, it's this opportunity to play around with alarm, and it's just a fun game, and everybody gets messy. So this is, I don't know, we had a game where my children tied their siblings up. We just had, these are scarves, and they would just tie everyone up. So this is playing around a little bit with frustration, with a little bit of alarm as well for the child who's being tied up. Obviously, and I'm going to talk about this later, you have to make sure that this is safe for all the participants. But this was a very popular game. There was, I did have rules about how people could be tied up and where they could be tied up. And we had there was, if a child had marshmallow, then had to stop. But yeah, they played a lot of this tying each other up to a tree as well. So boffers are plumbing tubes that are wrapped in a pool noodle and then duct tape. And my children would go out and they would beat up our green picnic table, which was the dragon. And I think they made totally lost my train. Shields. They made shields. So they go out and they beat up the dragon with these boffers, and it was a way for them to get out their aggression. I already spoke to karate. These are my two daughters, and as sisters sometimes do, they would fight quite a bit. And so in the karate here, They would get to beat each other up in a safe way, and it was always play. They knew it was play. The teddy bear's picnic is just a giant place to play. Okay, so they dressed up in kilts and they ran around the whole neighborhood yelling and screaming at the top of their voices. What a beautiful way for small children to work out aggression. This would have been in March. You can't see, but there's snow on the ground. And after being pent up outside, it was lovely. I'm sure our neighbors thought we were crazy, but yeah, but it was awesome. They enjoyed doing it. We used to play hide and go seek in the dark. This was a Christmas tradition for us. So we'd turn off the lights and leave the Christmas lights on, and then we would go and hide and seek. A lovely way to play alarm together. Playing around with your art, just drawing with red, angry pictures, allowing our kids to work out their emotions, or to paint everything in blue if they're sad, or just letting them create whatever their emotions are letting them to feel. This is very important, I will say. Sometimes teens especially, they like to swear. It's how they can deal with some of their aggression, some of their pent up emotion. And so giving them a place where they can do that, either a time when they do it, or I had a friend who, they had a swear jar, and so their kids could write all their swears down and then put it in the jar. And yeah, so it's about thinking creative about how you can help them move some of that pent up emotion. This is a game my husband invented. It's Bocce Ball, which I think you play by, I don't actually know how you play the real game now, but you roll the balls along a manicured lawn, and the idea is to get your ball closest to the little white ball with the jack. And my husband plays, they call it Ultimate Bocce Ball, and they throw a golf ball and you huck it as far as you can. And then each person throws their ball as far as they can to try to get as close as they can to the golf ball. And so they play in large open spaces. We usually play it when we're camping, or here they're at the beach. You can see there's one ball on the ground and one ball in the air. And my adult children still play this game. We've been playing this game a long time, and it's often something that my husband will do when they're just out with, when we're out with our contemporaries, not with our kids. Inside Out is a beautiful, beautiful movie that moves emotion and makes us feel our sadness. Books and movies can be ways that we play. I'll speak to that a little bit later. My daughter has an entire cemetery out in our backyard with gravestones and markers for the pets that we've lost. And this is play. This is her creating something that she sees that we do in the adult world, and her wanting to mark her losses and play around with her sorrow. And yeah, it's a beautiful thing to do. Play civilizes, socializes, and fosters caring. This is so interesting to me because one of the questions that I get so often about homeschooling is, what about socialization? And what's interesting is, you know, school didn't exist 120 years ago, 140 years ago, and socialization has been happening for 10,000 years. So the reality is we do not need school to socialize, and socialization in the past has always been done through play. That's how it happens. Thousands of years of culture are taking care of socialization. We learn how to interact with one another when we play together. We practice being adults because we imitate. So when we play growing up, when children, often young children, will play school because they're preparing, they're socializing themselves to enter into the school system. We figure out what works and what doesn't work in our interactions. So one of the things we need to do is we need to let kids try to figure out things on their own. Now, this comes with a stipulation, because kids, and I'm going to talk about this later, they need to feel safe. So if they're not feeling safe, then they may need for us to step in. So we had a rule in my home when there was fighting over a toy. They had to share it, they had to leave it, or they had to come up with some other plan. And they knew that, and so they would often engage in that, but for the longest time, they needed me to walk them through what that might look like and to give them ideas about what another plan might look like, and all the options. You know, we can set a timer. Someone can be on the swing for 2 minutes, and then you can reset the timer, and someone can be on the swing for another 2 minutes. Or we can put the toy away and nobody can play with it, because if nobody really wants, you know, if we can't come up with another plan, then we'll leave the toy. Or some unique way to share it, or we can get another another toy, but when kids are small, they may need help walking through that. But it's also really important to give them time and space to figure out how to do that, because that encourages their own problem solving skills. So I always kept my children, my small children, and even to a certain extent, some of my teens within hearing range. I had 5 children and there was a 10-year age span. And so I really needed to be there to protect my little one, and not always, because they tell stories about how my youngest son, so he's child number 4, they tied him to a tree and then left him outside. And I don't know where I was, but apparently he was out there a good long time before they took pity on him. I've heard stories about my children crawling out windows that I didn't know that they did. But they learn to navigate things themselves. So that's what we want to keep them safe, but we want to allow them as much time to do that. Play helps attention and learning. So this goes back to there being the 2 modes in our brain, the work mode and the play mode, the sympathetic mode and the parasympathetic mode. And I thought it was very interesting. So this is a UBC mind wandering study. And the bottom images there, the subject was instructed to concentrate on a task. I think it was a math task that they gave them. And then they took pictures of the brain. And then the top picture is they were instructed to just think about something, and however they wanted. They were just to let their mind wander on a certain topic. And you can see in the top picture with the mind wandering, there's much more lit up. And those areas are the creative thought, it's memories that's lighting up, it's the daydreaming, it's the prefrontal cortex. So that's the part of the thinking brain is thinking there. Whereas there's far less lit up in the work mode of the brain. And Daniel Levitin, the lead scientist, he said that it's not that the brain can't hold on to any one thought when the mind is wandering, but that no one thought is demanding this specific response. So it allows for a myriad of parts of the brain to light up. Now, we see this happen because if our children have been diagnosed with ADHD, inattention, they don't usually have a problem with attention when they're playing. But that's because when they're playing, the whole brain can light up and it can grab their focus. But when they're supposed to be on a task and alarm is getting in the way, which is usually ADHD is linked to alarm, then they can't focus on the task because the alarm is taking over the brain. And because the play mode removes those defenses, they can think more freely about things. So play frees up neurons and allows for more of those neurons to be used. And that's important because it grows stronger brains. These are slides from neural networks in the brain. And the first one there is taken from birth. And then the one in the middle is a 6-year-old, and you can see how much more linking there's happening there. And then the final one is a 14-year-old, and there's less linking. And so what happens is, and Rachel was talking about this in her talk, is that when a neuron fires, it creates a little link. And then the more that neuron fires, it lays down myelin on the outside of the neuron, and that hardens it up and it becomes more of a path. So it's like laying asphalt on a path. But when the neurons aren't hardened like that, the brain actually gets rid of them. It doesn't want to have stuff that it doesn't use. It likes to clean it all up. So the work mode actually uses less pathways in the brain, which means that the brain is actually going to cut out any of the pathways that aren't being used. And play uses more neurons, which means less neurons will be cut out if our children are engaging in play. So when we limit play in our children, we actually limit brain development. It's really important for learning, for maturity, that we let our kids play. It's best for their actual, like the actual building of the physical brain. Play helps attention, it helps learning, and it sparks creativity. So then our job as teaching parents is to try to make sure that we let our learning be discovery based. We let our kids go out and to touch things, to be in things, to discover things on themselves. So it's a little bit like sending them out on a treasure hunt, right? They have to go out and they have to find the treasure themselves. And that's going to engage more of the brain when they do it. And this is not to say that there aren't times and places where we don't have to give our kids knowledge, because we do. There's specific skills that we may want them to have. There's specific facts that are really hard for them to discover on their own. But if we can make sure that we're providing a large chunk of their time where they are discovering things on their own, that's going to be beneficial. One of the ways we can really help our kids is to let their responses to their learning be self-directed. So, I know there's been a lot of purchasing of workbooks, but workbooks is not a creative way to respond to information. When we open up and let our kids tell us what they learned, what they discovered, what they thought interesting, that's going to open up neurons in their brain. So that's actually when they were dressing up as Celts, this is something they wanted to do. This was their response. I didn't suggest that they do it. They asked, ooh, can we make broadswords? Ooh, can we dress up? Does grandma have material? And then they wanted to paint their faces blue. It's just Crayola marker. I didn't have face paints at the time. Now I keep face paints in the house, although they prefer the color markers. So this was them reacting to something that we had studied together. We read the story of Madeleine de Vicher, who's a French-Canadian hero who was able to save her fort when it was under attack. And we read it in the middle of the winter, and my kids went out and they built this giant fort with corners. And so they'd walk along the wall to the corner rooms. And they would go out and they'd play Madeleine Vicher, and they would act out the whole story of her in their free play. This wasn't something I did. I didn't ask. It was just, we've all been in the house too long. Get your clothes on, go outside, get your hour, 2 hours outside. And this is a story they still remember to this day because they spent so much time playing it and mimicking it. This is them. We had studied, there's a beautiful book at the library about Pompeii, and it's, Pompeii was destroyed by a volcano, but because it happened so quick, the town was pretty much frozen in time, and archaeologists have uncovered it. And so the book was 2 stories. It was the story of an archaeologist uncovering it in modern day times, and it was also the story of the people who were living in Pompeii back during Roman times. And the kids just really loved that double story. And they went out and they did exactly what archaeologists did. And they dug a corner of the square and they dug it all up. And it got really cute because my neighbor, he just had young grandchildren at the time, but I think he was excited about being a grandparent. And he was over helping me do something, and he saw they were doing this, and he came back after they were in bed and he hid coins in their plot. And so when they came out the next day, they found these coins from Mexico. And yeah, we played along for a while, and it was just so much fun. They loved this and learned a lot, I think, about archaeology, even though none of them are going to be archaeologists. We host Thanksgiving dinner for my family usually, and we always cook a turkey or a chicken. And my one daughter was so excited. I cook it down into stock, and it's just bones, and she wanted to see if we could put the bones together. Now this started off as a playful activity. I'm not sure it ended as one. It was very frustrating for us both, but this is what she wanted to do, and so I made time to try to figure out how to make that happen for her. So those are some of the ways that play takes care of us. It provides rest, it serves our emotion, it helps our attention, it helps us mature, it helps our relationships, it keeps us young at heart. And so the second part of this that I want to talk about tonight is, so then how do we take care of play? How do we make sure that there's play happening? Because a lot of what we call play isn't actually play. So this is Dr. Neufeld's slide, and there are 7 items that he identifies as necessary for true play. And I'm just going to walk through them one at a time, and a lot of them overlap, and a lot of what I've spoken of already, I will have, you'll see there's a lot of repeating. So the first thing that true play is it is not work. Play is not goal-oriented. It is not conscious of outcome. There is no finish to play. In fact, I read in one report that the goal of play is to keep on playing. And this is very different. We live in a very goal-oriented society, a very goal-oriented culture. And so this becomes really hard for us to see that the soccer game that our kids play in is probably not play, or that when our children are taking piano lessons and they're practicing for a recital, we say they're playing the piano, but that's not play. That's not what we mean by play. In the work mode, the pleasure comes from being done the task with the final product. In the play mode, the pleasure comes from the process. Now, there may be a product. If I bake a cake and I'm just having fun putting the ingredients together and figuring out how it all goes, and if I want to tweak it, maybe I'm experimenting with it. I'm going to try to decide, well, if I add orange, if I use chocolate chips in it, maybe I'll add some mint flavoring. And I'm not that concerned about what it comes out at the end. I mean, yes, we want a cake that we can eat, but I'm just having fun experimenting with it. That's play. But if I'm only focusing on making sure that the cake is going to look a certain way and taste a certain way, I want to take a picture, I want to make sure I can post it on Instagram. Even if I'm thinking that I don't want to have it show up on Cake Rex, which is a website of I think playfully done cakes, but what a lot of people think are poorly done cakes. If I'm worried about that, then I've moved from the play into the work. This is also not to say that some work isn't playful, because we can definitely work on something and be focused on the product and still roll in parts of play for it. Now, this is something I think may land controversially, but rewards destroy play. So we cannot reward our children for play. If you have a child who's noodling away on a piano and you come in and you start clapping, oh, that was just beautiful. You have now rewarded your child for their play, and your child may not engage in playing the piano in that way again. Or if they do engage in it, they may be looking for you to come in and clap. They may not actually play for themselves. They may work at trying to figure out what will make you come in and clap at their piece. So by rewarding our child, we have actually destroyed the play. Now, I know I'm very, very guilty of this. I like to think that I've gotten better as my children have aged, and I get to really make a mess of it with my older one and hopefully figure out how it works by the time I got to my younger one. But it's been very hard to not provide praise around items that they show me, is to just say, what can you tell me about this picture? What do you like about this picture? What do you think about it? And not offer my opinion at all, because my opinion, my encouragement could be seen as a reward. If there are questions about that one, because I know it can be a little controversial. So do not offer rewards for playful activities, and do not focus on outcomes. This can be a really difficult thing to do. We play a lot of board games in my house. My family now are all involved in Manitoba, which is the provincial board game conference, which sadly will not happen this year, but we have done it for many years now. We do all of the gaming rooms at all of the cons, the conventions that happen in the city. But we work really, really hard to make sure that our play is not competitive. It's not about who wins. We sometimes don't keep track of who wins. When my kids were young, we played a lot of cooperative games. There's a game of Bonanza, which is a farming game for beans. And when my kids were young, we used to play with all the cards face up. And then I don't know, we actually lost track of the real rules. And so we just played it with this kind of communal approach to everybody seeing everybody's crops. And then one day the kids said, Mom, that's not how you play the game. And it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe we'll try playing the game the way the game's supposed to be played. And nobody liked it because it was very competitive in its nature. And we had spent years just making it so that everybody could try to get as many beans as they could in the season that was laid out. So there are ways to play games and not have them be focused on the outcome. This is not to say that you don't play games and that children don't learn how to lose, because that is an important skill. It's an important skill to learn how to win graciously and how to lose graciously. But that's different than allowing time for play. And so we need to not confuse those two. If we're going in and we're going to play a game and there's going to be some teaching about what it means to win or lose, we need to know that we're doing work. That's a teaching experience. It's not a playful experience. This is minute to win it games. We often get together with family and we'll play the minute to win it games. And I'm very much, I've done cooperative games. I used to do cooperative games for the city of Winnipeg. So I'm a big fan of them. And I always try to make sure my minute to win it games are cooperative in nature and more about completing the task than it is about who completed it fastest or first. And so this was just a snowball dodgeball game. I guess everyone had to scrunch up the papers and they were in teams and try to get as much as they could on the other side. But my daughter, this past Christmas, before when we could be out and about, was at a Christmas party, and there were a bunch of minute to win it games, and it was a multi-aged event. So I think the youngest was 6 and the oldest was 17. And it was competitive, and there were prizes, and there were really good prizes. And of course, there was no way for the 6-year-old or the 7-year-old to compete. And some of the older children, they were very competitive in their nature and didn't graciously allow some of the younger kids. So, and my daughter came home and she just said it was a really awful experience. It was an awful experience to see what should have been a community building experience where we played and socialized together ended up being this competitive work experience where she didn't feel close to the people at the end of it. She just felt sometimes what we feel like when we go home from work. Well, that wasn't much fun. I'm glad it's over. So it's important for us to see that, sure, there are times for competition, but it's not play, and we need to make sure that our children are getting a good dose of play. This was I've always played the pin the tail on the donkey, and we've always tried to do like pin the tail on the turkey or ways. And in this particular instance, this was a going away party for my daughter's good friend who was moving down to Texas, and we played, they each had to pick the place where they're going to move to, and he mostly ended up living in the Atlantic Ocean, I think. But ways that you can change games to make them more inclusive or more fun and less competitive in their nature so that they can be playful. Piano, learning an instrument. Learning an instrument is work, and one of the things that my husband was very adamant about, he's a self-taught musician, but he wanted to make sure that music in our home was always playful and that the job of working for music wouldn't override the job of playing with music. And so we worked hard to find instructors who would let my kids noodle around or have we didn't follow a curriculum usually, lots of independent thought about how they wanted to learn their piano. And a tragic story that happened is my daughter Maggie decided that maybe she would like to go to school for music, and she tried out for a music program, and it was a very difficult process. And unfortunately, the after her audition, the people who worked in the program, who turned out were fired a little bit later, they were very, very cruel to her and really scarred her. And she did not play the piano for a year afterward. It took a very long time. And she came home the other day and asked if she could sit down and play the piano. And I listened to her play for half an hour. And I think that's the first time I've heard her play the piano in a very long time. And so it's really important sometimes that we need to guard our children so that something that they love and engage in is play, that when it becomes work, there are mechanisms for recovery from that. And for her, there just wasn't enough mechanism except time to heal some very terrible wounds. Now, digital computers. Computer games are generally not play because computer games are designed with an outcome in mind. The computer programmers want you to get from point A to point B. And while there may be some discovery along the way, the point really is to get from point A to point B. There are some games out there, however, that are playful. And so Minecraft is one that my kids play in. This is a Taj Mahal that was completed by my daughter. She actually has a group of people who play together on a server, and they're trying to create all of these worlds. It's getting late. So Taj Mahal, Eiffel Tower, Grand Canyon. So they're in the process of creating all of these sightseeing places in their little world. So not only are they socializing together and playing together, they are being creative, and you'll see some of the other ways. So it is possible for computer games to be play, but most of them are not. And unfortunately, the ones that are not are often stealing our children from being able to engage in real play. So true play is not for real. If it's real, then we're in the work mode. And there's not much to say about this. We kind of know, there's this hazy thing when our children are very young. It's hard sometimes for them to tell the difference between real and not real because they don't have enough experience. So it's mostly about this sense that we know that it's playtime, that this particular moment and this particular place we're playing, and that's different from not playing. And most children can navigate that or learn to do that very early. But what I wanted to say here is that it's important to understand that what might be play for one person might not be play for another person. So one person's teasing can be another person's torture. And so it's really important for us as adults who are trying to facilitate play to make sure that whatever the play is happening, that all of the children are engaged in the imaginary aspect of it. And if it's moving into the not imaginary for some training, we all know when the fighting goes from being play fighting to being real fighting. There's always that very hazy line. It's hard to see. And so one of our jobs as parents is to make sure that we are seeing when that happens and protecting children from the hurt that can happen, because play shouldn't be hurtful. I do know that one of the very important, someone asked earlier about teens, one of the very important things that we've done in my home is do role-playing games. And my children, this is a great opportunity for teens to play in a not for real world and yet to have a lot of realness about it. So they create these characters, and these characters can be like them, or these characters can be very different from them. And then they can go in and they can do these quests. And so teens can figure out what they want their character to look like. And it's a really beautiful way for teens and children too, to engage in this imaginary world that's not real and yet has that sense of realness about it. So you have to make sure that play isn't becoming something real and uncomfortable for your child. And this is really super important if you have sensitive children, because, a little bit of teasing in my family, the teasing wasn't usually teasing. And so I have struggled in my own family to navigate what's teasing and what's not. So we have very firm guidelines about what's teasing and what's not. And this will be for you on, every child is different. And part of our providing play for our children is knowing when one child is struggling with it. True play is expressive and exploratory. So entertainment is not work and it's not real, but it's not usually play because it doesn't have this element about it. True play allows for ourselves to be injected into the game or the creation or the imagination. So a book or movie can become play when it engages my imagination. So I'm thinking about who am I in this movie, or what would I do when I'm dreaming about it, when I go past. So when my kids, we read the Madeline de Vicher book, and then they were out reenacting that, then the book had become play for them. Our emotions have to be engaged when we play. So if they're not engaged, then it's just entertainment. If we just sit back and we enjoy this show or this movie or this book or this video game, then that's just entertainment. But if it engages our hearts, if we find ourselves weeping at the music or being really upset or really angry, then we've moved into the realm of play. So one of the things that's important here is that we make room for individuality, because if it's about expression and if it's about what's inside us coming out, then we have to make that safe. We have to make room for them to express their differences. And I think it's really important too, not to demand that you see personal projects. So if your children are creating things and they don't want to show it to you, that's okay, because it's their creation and they shouldn't have to show it to you. some pictures here. So we always do gingerbread houses every year, and we used to make the standard gingerbread house, and then they wanted different gingerbread houses, and so it became this whole thing where it was an opportunity for them to express themselves, and it's a whole month-long thing, and they would plan it out, and then they would make their gingerbread, and then they would decorate them in whatever way they wanted, and except for the fact that everybody got a set amount of candy, the same amount of candy, what they did was, and the same amount of dough, what they did was entirely up to them. So just ways that you allow that individuality to come in and be playful. We do a lot of cosplay and costuming, and when my children became too old to go out for Halloween, we struggled a little bit to find ways for them to do this. I said we got heavily involved in theater, and for 10 years we ran a homeschool community theater and did a full Shakespearean play every year. It was very exciting. But one of the other things that we did is we got involved in Comic-Con and would dress up. We dress up every year. We used to dress up as a family. Now there's a lot more individuality. But this particular year, we decided to go steampunk, and then every person is responsible for their own costume. That doesn't mean that they don't get help from people. It just means that they get to dream, and they get to decide, and they get to make it come true. This is about not showing people things. So this is a comic, Got Your Nose, Zombie Dad Jokes, and she put it up there. This was a private joke, and she didn't show it to us, and I found it later on. My daughter, I have pages and pages and pages. She did this project where she started off with one llama and one sheep, and how much wool that she could sell, and she gave an amount for that wool, and then with the money that she earned from that wool, the next year she bought more llama and more sheep, and she found out she gave a price for feed, and she gave a price for veterinarian bills, and then the more llamas, then the feed and the veterinarian bills went up. So she has 5 or 6 pages of 30 years worth of tracking her little llama sheep farm. This is entirely, it was not an assignment for me. And the only reason I know this exists is because 3 weeks ago, she was going through her childhood bedroom stuff and came across it and said, oh, look at this. And here was this whole world that she had engaged in, someone who, if you asked her, she'd say she'd hate math. And yet here she is at some point in her life, she doesn't actually know when, playing around with these huge amount of numbers, and I could just see her pride and how much she remembered it. And I looked at it, and it's quite in depth. Like, she must have Googled prices for things and how much pounds of feed each would have. Like, she worked really hard on it. This was a huge project, but it was all done in play. It was all her own expression and involvement, completely done by her. True play is emotionally safe, and I've talked a little bit about the safety here. I love this image. If you look for Sush art, he has lots of art, but of the giant dad over his tiny baby, and all of these heavy bricks of things are going to weigh down on her, and he's standing between those things and his daughter. And it could be a son, but I know in other comics that he's done, it's a daughter. This is our job. Our job is to make sure that our kids are emotionally safe. Of course, we want play to be physically safe. We don't want our children to get hurt. But the reality is, sometimes they get hurt. When they play, sometimes they get hurt. And that's not a bad thing. Studies show that the more risk children are allowed to take in play, the more accurate they are at assuming healthy risk in their lives in other places. So it's important to make sure it's safe. But what that means is that it's safe emotionally, that they feel comfortable, that it isn't raising their alarm, that it isn't raising their real emotions, that it's in that special place of not reality. I love this picture. These are my 2 middle kids. We did a lot of wrestling and tickling, but there was always this safeness about it. I'm going to share a little video a little bit later on about how we create some of that space with our invitation. But they're going to get hurt here because they're having fun and they're losing control of their bodies, and so the hurt is going to happen, but they're having fun. And this is a really hazy place to watch. It's really hazy to see when our children are struggling emotionally in play. And that just means we have to become students. We have to watch our children, which means we have to spend time watching them play. We have to spend time listening to what their play looks like. My neighbor down the street, she parented very similar to me. And so we used to take turns. She would sit out on the lawn chair. This is when we had small children. I think her daughter was 3 or 4, and then mine would have been all under 10. And so we would take turns. She would sit out there on our lawn chair and she would just read her book or look at her design magazines. And then after a couple hours, it would be my turn to go out and spend time just letting the kids play. We had all the kids on our block played together and created imaginary worlds and things. So this video was played with me, and this is about making play safe when it's not safe. So this dad is in Syria and there are bombs dropping, and he's turned it into a playful game with his daughter. This is a beautiful example of how you make play safe. If any of you have seen the movie Life is Beautiful, that is a heart-wrenching movie about how an adult makes the world safe through play, even when it's not. And this is our job. It's our job to figure out how we make play safe when it's not, and how we keep our kids safe when it's not. True play is freely entered. For any of you who have dogs, you know this stance. This is like every dog, this is instinctual, knows that that stance means, will you play with me? And if a dog mimics that back, then they enter into play together. So the play is mutually agreed upon when it's social. It's freely entered. And if a dog didn't want to play, then it wouldn't. It would just sidle on by or not engage. And then this little puppy would know that it's not supposed to play. We have to keep an invitation open for our kids to play. We have to let them know it's okay to play. Sometimes we have to, as our kids get older, we have to be sneaky about how we encourage them to come and play with us. One of the ways that we can do that is keeping lots and lots of supplies on hand. So we can fill our homes with craft supplies, art supplies, journal, musical instruments, music, so that they have access to music. We can fill it with books. We can fill it with heartfelt movies. We can fill it with Play-Doh. We can fill it with cooking supplies. All of these things that our children should be able to have access to will help them engage in play in the moment. That's how we invite them. This is my daughter's craft table. And we were really struggling because she's very, very crafty, my youngest daughter. She's very artistic. And so finally, we just set up a card table in a corner of the basement. We don't really have room for it. We were 7 people in my home up until a few months ago, and it's pretty tight, but, and there was a little bit of concern because some of the others were like, oh, get a craft table, but the craft supplies were everywhere and she was getting frustrated and we were frustrated. So we just put this table up, and that's all. It's all of her paint. It's all of her chalk. It's all there and all accessible for her. And she cleans it up about once a month. She'll go through her projects and there's more supplies underneath, but this is her place she goes to. And when she's feeling frustrated or when she's feeling creative or when she's feeling bored, this is where she goes. There's an open invitation here for her to play. I said that we're board gamers. We constantly inviting our children to partake in things with us. And our children, now that they're older, are inviting us to partake in things that they love. So 2 of my sons got involved in some airsoft games, and they invited their dad to come along, and he really felt that he was kind of busy and he had lots of other things that probably should be going, but his boys invited him. And so he went with that invitation. And now the 3 of them, they're planning costumes and they're retrofitting things and painting things. And it's just become this game that these 3 grown men are now engaging in together, and they're pulling other men in, and it's just really beautiful. But it's about an invitation. It's about being open to an invitation. It's about honoring the invitation when it comes in. And so we do lots of games, and we do work hard to try to include our kids. I thought this is going back to the tickling, and one of the ways we keep an invitation, we also need to be able to remove an invitation because that's how we stay safe. And my youngest daughter sent this to me just the other day, and I thought, this is perfect.
I'm going first, okay? Okay, your turn. Stop! Good job. Okay, my turn. Ready? Stop! Good job, good job. Okay, my turn. Okay, your turn. No! Good job, good listening. Okay, my turn. Remember, you can say no too. You like how I listen to you? Good. Okay, your turn. Woo! Stop! Good job. Good listening.
So beautiful, using play to teach this giant concept of consent, which we're struggling with in our society. And she's playing playfully with her little guy, and the laughter, it's just such a beautiful moment and captures so much about everything that I've been talking about today. And the final thing is, true play is engaging. Now, we often think that true play is fun. And it can be fun, but it's not always fun. It's about play engaging us, sucking us in. If any of you are familiar with Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, he wrote a book called Flow. And it's a big deal in the business world, actually, where business people, business managers are trying to make it so that their employees can engage in flow. And flow is this optimal state of intrinsic motivation. And so it's when your employees do what you need for them to do because they want to do it. And I remember reading it and being, oh, that's just play. That's all it is. Flow is just how you try to bring play into the workplace. And so it doesn't have to be fun. I mean, it's great if it's fun, but therapists use play in therapy, and they help children to process terrible trauma through play. And it's the same as this kind of play, but it's not fun, but it is liberating, and it is engaging, and it moves emotion. So play needs to suck you in and keep you wanting to be there. It preserves the free will. So what we need to do is not interrupt it if we can help it. When they're playing, try to make time for them to play. If they're getting off on something, we never got through our homeschool routine because inevitably there would be something that would come up that would really ignite my kids' passion, and I would give them the time to follow that passion, to play with that idea, and try to enter into it with them. Not always. If they're having great, that's good, and to let them develop a relationship with themselves or with their siblings. But it can also be a lot of fun to join in with them and share that together. This is a picture of my teenagers. I think the oldest one here is probably 17, and it was a warm summer rainstorm. And this is something we always did when they were small. We always went puddle stomping. If there was a nice rain flowing on a really warm day and it didn't look like there was lightning, then we would go out and we would stomp in the puddles, and they are sliding. They're like slip sliding down the street. And a couple of my neighbors came out to take pictures, because when do you ever get to see teenagers just frolicking in the play puddles? And they spent a long time playing with that because it was engaging, it was freeing, it was, in this particular case, it was fun. And the last thing that true play needs is time and space. And this is where homeschoolers have a real advantage. But even we can get sucked into this culture that schedules our days Monday to Saturday with soccer and ballet and piano and scouts and origami and gymnastics and dance and craft time. And this poor little girl is saying, I just can't wait to grow up, and all I have to do is go to work. We need to block out time. We need to make sure that there's margin in our lives and not even margin. It has to be more than margin. It has to be part of our schedule. Children need to play. Adults need to play. We'd be so much healthier if we could figure out as adults how to play. And so a couple of things that we've done in our life is to keep our schedule open. We aren't hugely scheduled. When I had 5 of them, we had to participate in lessons as a family, because I wasn't going to a whole bunch of different places. And basically we focused on one kind of artistic class and one physical type class. So we ended up really loving karate. We do that as a family. And then there were a few little odds and ends. We did theater. A couple of my kids have taken a few art classes. A couple of my kids have taken a few instrument classes, but nothing that consumed our life. And if you do have something that consumes your life, if your children are involved in performance or dance or that, then it's just vitally important to make sure that you have downtime for them where they can engage and play, because then they're doing school and they're doing this other work. And so it's absolutely vital that you make time in the schedule for them to have time to play. We need to let our kids be bored, because play comes from boredom. Creativity comes from boredom. If there's always something going in, then there isn't room and time for something to come out. And we have to make that space for our kids to be able to have what's inside come out. And so boredom is one of the ways we get there. There's something called deschooling for any of you who are new to homeschooling, which is if our kids have been in school, there's a lot of going into them. That's a lot of what happens in the public classroom. And so a lot of educators, homeschoolers recommend deschooling, where you do nothing just so your children can learn what it means for what's inside of them to come out. So it's about making space and time for that. And I spelt guard wrong, but guard your time together. It's about relationship. If our kids are feeling close to us and feeling safe and feeling full, then play will come naturally from that. And so if we can make time for our attachment, then the play will happen, which kind of goes back to what I said earlier about how the parental relationship is more important than the teacher relationship. So when you're struggling with school, it's okay to struggle with school, but not at the expense of your relationship. You need to make sure your relationship is the most important thing, and that's what you go back to, and making sure that that is safe and solid. So that's how we take care of play. We have to make sure that it's not work. We have to make sure it's not real. We have to make sure it's safe for our kids, that it's exploratory, that it's engaging. And that's what I have. Oh, I'm not too over. I have time for questions. I'm sorry I've kept you all a little bit late. If you need to go, please do so, but I will open it up for questions if anyone has anything. Maybe I've put you all to sleep. All good? Thank you very much for coming. Play on daily things.
I'm thinking like math class. The stuff that parents are really struggling with right now, they've got worksheets, they've got things to get done. Is there a way that you can integrate play into like the day-to-day schoolwork?
Yeah, definitely. So like I know with math, if you're using manipulatives, you can make the manipulatives fun. So they can be Cheerios or they can be Skittles, so, ways to make it more playful. You can always take a break if something is getting really stressful. We think about math because math is often one of those stressful things. There are lots of games. I have a whole workshop on how to play educational games. There's lots of games that you can play that would reinforce math skills. I always started my day with read aloud. Always. We had breakfast and then everyone just cuddled on the couch And we started the day with read aloud, something playful that wasn't school-like, that we shared in together, that helped create attachment. Because I think that's really important, is if you get to, just pull everyone in and we spend this moment together, then it's a little bit easier to move into some of the more rigorous work that's required in schooling. It's about sometimes following your kids' lead. It's about letting them. So my daughter was supposed to read a book, and she read the first chapter, and she came to me and she said, I don't like this book. And there's always a way off, right? Well, I think this is important. You need to do it. But for me, my goal here actually is to have her enjoy reading, because that's something we've struggled with. And so I'm going to try to make this playful. I want for her to have something that she's engaged in, that she's enjoying, that she could be really creative, that she could have herself be a part of. And so I'm going to change the book. So some of it is about being conscious and trying to see what's going on and being willing to shift or move in the day-to-day life. Now, math has to be done. And so sometimes there is a time to work. We all need to learn how to work, but work is something that, we're raising our adults to be able to do, and our expectation that our 6-year-old or our 8-year-old or our 10-year-old can work at a level of an adult is unrealistic. And so it's remembering not to judge your spring apples in the fall, that the goal is that your 26-year-old be able to work and play, not necessarily that their 10-year-old be able to work, when really they're supposed to play until they're old enough and mature enough to work. Does that answer the question at all?
Yeah, I think there's some real practical applications to play that a lot of people are struggling with the day-to-day now.
Yeah, I think there's a whole course. There could just be a whole course where we just talk about ideas, and other people share ideas, because other people have way more different ideas of play, like Rachel Fessick-Lamb, right? Like, I know she's got lots. I've been to her house. There's like playful stuff everywhere at her home. And so other people, maybe it's one of those things we should try starting something on the Facebook group where we all talk about ways that we bring play into some of our subject areas or our day-to-day life, or the way we make, how are we Mary Poppins and make the chores easier to do? How do we figure out what the spoonful of sugar looks like in our house and do it? And like I said, it's about other people having just as much ideas as I do. And for you, trying to figure it out. You need to play around with what works in your house. Okay. Well, I'm exhausted. I'm sure everybody else has. I really wanted to make this interactive and playful, and then there was just so much information, and I didn't know what to do and what not to do. So I hope that it has inspired you. I hope that it's given you some ideas. I hope it's given you some food for thought. I hope that you will look at your kids and figure out how you can enjoy some more play. Thank you very much for being here. And next week is we're having a panel on what it means to homeschool teens. And we have some wonderful parents who are going to share some of their stories and ideas of how they made it work. I know some parents who are very playful parents. And so I know that they will come with lots of ideas and inspiration for you if you're actually homeschooling your teens, or if you're looking forward to how that might work for you. Good night, everyone.